let's get started. And hopefully we get the white pieces because we're doing King's Indian attack. Let's get started. Bam. Hey, we get white. Okay, great. So originally when I was doing this, I was doing King's Gambit run. But then I realized, wait, King's Indian attack we can do with the white pieces. So that's what we're going to do here. So we're just going to go with the normal setup of a King's Indian attack by playing d3 and g3, knight d2, all of these classic moves. Nothing crazy. We could go bishop g5. That's generally how I would like to consider trying to play against this, but this is okay. I'm happy with my position already. One thing they can try is knight c6 to d4 as a little tricky, because if I ever took it, then they try to get a mate threat in. We don't really have to worry about that, though. We can just go bishop g2 and castle. They can try g5, but g5, I mean, come on. Yeah, so now it's time to castle. And our king is safe. They're probably going to castle, but their queen's a little awkward. So how do we continue development here? There's a few ways. There's knight d2. There's also moves like a4, but I'm going to start with knight d2. The idea of knight d2 is this pawn, I'm trying to argue, could be a weakness. And I want to go knight c4 to start targeting it. They always have d6 as a response. But this is just the King's Indian defense where our opponent didn't really get much central control in. So we're happy about that. And a normal move we play in these types of positions is c3. If d5, we generally ignore those in the King's Indian. So that's exactly what I'll do. So this makes this piece really awkward. And now I have kind of a tricky idea. And it involves knight c4 to target this pawn further. Because my big idea is if they ever play d6 now, like the b6 move should immediately warn someone that the bishop on c5 could be kicked around, right? So I want to play b4 to trap the bishop, but the bishop has d6. So how do I try to provoke d6? That's my big idea here, and I want to go knight c4 to do that. I could also go a4, but I like knight c4 here. And now there's also an additional thing to point out. If I go b4, bishop d6, I can now win the bishop pair. And in a position like this, winning the bishop pair is actually a pretty great deal. So I'm going to go into that with b4. Even though my center looks a little weird, I have the bathtub scenario where all my pawns are like a little bathtub here. And my knight's taking a bath. But it's surprisingly hard to target any of these pawns. Once bishop d6 happens and I take it, I'm expecting queen takes. Pawn takes isn't the most ridiculous thing if they're trying to target c3, but it also is kind of ridiculous because they're just doubling their pawns for no inherent reason. But the idea, actually, there is a reason, is they're trying to create an imbalance. We'll have to see how our opponent plays, though. That's the most important thing. So bishop takes b4 is kind of just incorrect. And the reason why is because they're giving up a bishop for 2 pawns. And 2 pawns is not worth it in a position like this. So I'm just going to continue on with my merry way of development. I can take on e5 now, and I'm very happy about that. But I have to be a little careful because this long diagonal, as we can see, there's some trickies. Like if I play knight takes and they go d6, all of a sudden I can't move my knight because then the rook in the corner gets, well, dropped. I could, however, play knight takes e5, d6, and then bishop to a3, which defends my rook, prepares to move, and also attacks their knight in return. And that looks like a good option. Knight takes e5, d6, bishop a3. And if they take on d3, and I take back, they take on e5 here. How do I feel about that resulting position? I'm not sure. So maybe Let's just go bishop b2. Let's just develop. Now I'm just starting to win the pawn outright. Again, because our rook on the corner was hanging, we always have to be cognizant of whenever there's some sort of alignment going on. And that's one of those times where alignment could have been a serious issue. Now, not as much, which is good. So this is our first game playing the King's Indian attack against e5. Again, as I mentioned earlier, originally I was going to be doing a bunch of different ones at the same time. I was going to be doing, like in this one account, I was trying bunch of openings that I had little to no experience in, which was King's Indian attack, the French, King's Gambit, and the only one I did have experience in was the King's Indian defense. I decided to change this and just focus on the King's Indian attack for this entire run, just so we make sure we really like absorb the ideas. And I think that's a really important thing to do. I'm saying really a lot. All right, now how should we play this position? I'm thinking of getting in f4. So I want to go knight e1. And we could also try knight c2 to e3. Or just the simple knight e1 is enough. And we're trying to play f4 and try to take advantage of the fact that, first off, they can't take on f4 because their queen is hanging. And also, we're threatening to take on e5 again and isolate that pawn, weakening it. And one important thing is, why is f4 good when, you know, the center isn't locked? It's a bit fluid. Like, breaks are possible here. So why am I regarding the move f4 so high? And that's because there's no dark squared bishop for black. If there was a dark square bishop for black, I think this would be a little bit more concerning, just because on this long diagonal, they could push us to the h-file and make our king just a little bit weaker. But luckily, there is no such thing. So do we take on e5 with the bishop or the knight? If we take with the knight, this does look okay, but our bishop is undefended. If we take with the bishop, the queen has to move, which is nice. And I don't hate that. I like taking with the bishop here. And the thing is, our knight isn't hanging because we can take on d5 next move and everything will be safe. So now we don't have to play f4. The whole idea of f4 originally was just to open up the king side a little bit. Now the center's opening when we're up a piece. And this should favor us because we have more material. And it's clear to mention that the material here is more so referring to the pieces that we have than anything else. I kind of really want to play this move here, bishop f4, and keep attacking the queen. There is a good reason. I'm not just doing this for the sake of attacking. There's two moves I have in mind. If queen g6, I would love to play knight e5 and attack it further, just to get my pieces to nicer squares. And if they went queen f6 before, then I would go e5 and actually close the center a little bit. But with the pawn on e5, there's huge attacking potential. So if queen f6, okay, queen d6, this walks into potential pins like knight takes f7. So this has to be something that's concerning for them. Knight takes f7, what does that do here? If they go queen g6, I can just move back. I don't hate a3. a3, knight c6, I take it. They have to take with the queen. And then I can take here. And they have to take with the knight. And that pins the knight for a move or two. And I don't think we're upset about that. Knight takes f7 is just one of those moves where it's like, if it's best, it's best. And the reason why is because they can't do anything about all the attacks, right? Their queen is attacked, and I just took a pawn. And I'm threatening just to move back. Or to win their queen, of course. And neither one they really want to deal with. So a3, knight takes f7. Are there any other moves that we should be considering here? I'm not sure. Bishop h3 is tempting. And the idea of bishop h3 is we're threatening knight d7, trying to take advantage of this queen. And this would win an exchange. But it feels like an empty threat. If we go bishop h3, maybe they just move their rook, right? Or their queen. They can't go to f6. They can't go to c5. Maybe bishop h3 is stronger than I thought. Maybe there's f5, but f5 feels flimsy. Taking it. Knight takes. Yeah, it feels a little flimsy, but it also doesn't feel so bad. I don't know. I also like knight g4. If I'm really trying to go for them. I think ultimately I'm going to choose between a3 and knight f7. But knight f7, I think my pieces are just a little odd. Where I'm going to have to like retreat them in a weird way. And I'm not sure if I want to do that. So I think a3 is a good start. Because after knight c6, things also get a little bit clearer where I don't have to do what I mentioned. I can just kind of relax. Like I can play knight takes f7 after, maybe. But it also makes it a little harder because after knight c6, knight f7, okay, they don't even go there. That's actually great for us. Because now we can look at more discovery potential. And I'm looking at a move like queen a4. The problem is they have g5 in the position. This is something I just realized. g5, we have to move our bishop, and then the knight hangs. So we have to be very careful of that. So now I think it's actually time to take. And what we could do, sometimes when you're out material and you're not sure what to do, sometimes the best way is to just give it back, but get something huge for it. So knight takes f7 followed by knight takes h6 is actually a very real possibility and something we should definitely be looking at here. Knight takes f7. The queen moves. Knight takes h6. Pawn takes his force because the queen can't take. And then after that, we can go queen g4 check and start harassing their queen a little bit. I like knight f7 as a start. Because of this discovery. And we have to see where their queen goes. If queen f6, then I think we're sacrificing the exchange back. Okay, so they don't actually do anything regarding that, so I can go knight e5 here and keep my exchange. I can also go d4. And I don't know how happy their queen is right now. d4, attacking their queen again. Just getting tempos for free. I could have also... No, I couldn't. I was thinking knight d3, but that doesn't make sense. Okay, and now I can just play knight e5 with tempo instead. So we see like the power of like whenever your opponent's queen is just a little misplaced, starts getting kicked around a ton. And now it has to go to b5. I think that's the only square, or c3. Now what? Now we're not worried of g5. We just have bishop e3 or bishop d2. Is it time to take on d5 yet? Or is it time for a move like rook c1? I'm trying to be too perfectionistic, I think. Is that a word? Maybe it's not even a word. But I do have a nasty idea in mind. So what I want to do is I want to take, knight takes, and I want to take on h6. And if they take back, queen g4 check, king h8, there's knight g6, and if king h7, I can give a check on g6 and then take on h6. And then give another check on g6. And then it should be so close to mate. Like knight f3 to g5, you know? Which is why I'm also looking at knight f3 immediately. Or knight d3. Now those are tempting options. Okay, I'm going to take first. We'll start with this move. And I really, really, really want to take, actually. Okay, so they take this way instead. which might be the smarter way to do it. So I'll take. Now, actually, I think my plans have changed a little bit. I want to go knight g2, fianchetto my knight, just to defend my bishop here. And this is actually helping with the attack of taking on h6 still. Because if they do something, let's just say rook d8, I take on h6, this should actually help me a lot. First off, I have queen f3 attacking the knight. But bishop h6 looks very strong now. Scarily so. Takes, queen check, king h8, and then just a move like queen g6. And it's really hard to defend everything. I could also go queen g4 first, but then I don't get to take on h6, because first off, they have taking on d4, and they also have knight takes f4. So I think taking on h6 is the right call. This is like really, really, really aggressive, but I think it's the right move to make. Sometimes you just got to make moves that look a little scary, but, you know, if you don't risk it for the biscuit, then there ain't no biscuit to win. So takes, and then queen g4 to g6 with tempo. Like queen g4 check will be a check, obviously, and queen g6 can happen no matter what, because king h8 or h7, I get to play queen g6, and there's threats of me taking, yeah, so queen g4 check, and then I want to go queen g6. And sure, they get to play a move like knight f6, but I don't know if it defends the squares that they need to defend, which is a problem. Yeah, so here now I get to get it with check. And I could play knight f7, but I don't know if I'm interested in that. I don't know. Knight f7 will be winning the rook, but I feel like there's so much more to win. Let's start with taking, because this never hurts to take a free pawn, because then we can just play queen g6 and then think all over again, right? You know what I'm realizing? We do have moves like rook c1, and then maybe even taking on c7, if they're not careful. And then if knight takes... Rook c1, they move somewhere. We take on c7, they take on c7, and then we play knight f4. The idea is to go to h5. I'm trying to find something promising. I could also just go knight f7, and this should actually work. Because knight f7, they have to take it. I take. I'm attacking their knight. They have to do something about their knight, like defending it or moving it. And then I just play rook e1, and rook e8's very hard to stop. So I think knight f7 is the right call. I don't think I need to be too fancy with it. They can take on d4, but I don't think I care. Because if they take on d4, I have rook d1, and I win the knight on d5 through a skewer. So we're actually still up material, which is great. And now I think things just start falling. So I could take on c1 here. I could go rook c1 here, and they can't defend the knight. And I think I want this knight more than the other one. So I'm going to go here. And if they move their knight somehow to attack me, then I can just take. Or go queen h5 check. So I don't actually lose my queen. We're not trading queens here. Okay. Now I took it. And rook h6 is very hard to stop. They have to go queen d2. But then I go knight e3 just to block it for one move. So queen d2, knight e3. If they take it, I just go rook h6 checkmate. And if they go queen g7, then I just take on d5. And I continue my attack. This was a very interesting game. Very, very interesting game. Yeah, so I think this is checkmate. Yeah, so there's a lot to look at here. And I want to see how we could have improved and just how the game went. Let's get into it. So e4, e5, knight f3, queen f6, d3. So again, we go for our normal King's Indian setup. And I'm happy to see that white actually has a slight advantage here from all this. which is really nice. Because again, the whole point of these King's Indian attacks is that you're trying to play like a tempo up King's Indian defense. So if you play the King's Indian defense and you're not sure what to do with the white pieces, consider the King's Indian attack, right? So knight d2, knight c6, c3. And the idea is we could go for some sort of d4. I was just opting to not go for that and again just go for more queenside or kingside play. b6. b6 felt really weird. And as we can see, the computer just goes wild here. So I should have gone b4, bishop d6, and a4, and just go for the space. I played knight c4 first, which I thought was okay. Computer's not as big of a fan. Oh, and I should have realized that it's not as big of a fan because of a5, right? That's something that I should have seen. But I didn't do that. And I could take on e5 here, but there's not really too much of a point. Yeah, so b4 first was better, but they play bishop b7, and this just makes b4 possible again. And again, they should really play b5, but yikes. I was expecting bishop d6, not bishop takes b4. I think this is the better way to play. But the problem is when you go into a position like this, I'd probably just take on d6. And the computer doesn't like it as much. I like it more. And the reason why is because we have the bishop pair in one of these sort of King's Indian positions. And it feels like white's the one pushing by quite a bit. So knight c4, bishop b7, b4, bishop takes b4. And at this point, I think it's just winning. Just because we're up a piece for 2 pawns. Bishop b2, d6, knight e1. So yeah, actually knight e1 and knight h4. Generally, you want to play knight h5 in the King's Indian. So knight h4 is something you want to play here. I went for knight e1 just because, like, you know, when the knight's on h4, sometimes f4 is a little awkward. Sometimes, but even here it's not. So I should have realized that, but I didn't. And it doesn't seem like it matters enough anyways. And it's pretty telling that the top move is queen e6. Yikes. Because we want to play f4 and white has a huge advantage. Of course, we're up a piece at this point, but the advantage does increase further from opening the position up when you're up material. Because then your pieces just do more than your opponent's, so your plans are generally harder to stop. So here, knight takes e5 was actually best. I was a little concerned about it just because I was worried that, you know, there's something along this diagonal. I didn't think there was anything serious, but I just wanted to be safe. That's why I went with bishop takes, which is almost as good, but close enough. Queen g5. Actually, I was considering f4. I went bishop f4 instead, which is significantly weaker. But f4 is very strong here because the queen's just starting to run out of squares here. And it has to go to h7 or c6. But as we can see, after a move like knight e3, they're clearly not happy about that. For example, like if pawn takes, then I think we can play bishop take. Oh, bishop takes g7 is playable. Ouch. Ouch, 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 ouch. Because if you take it, the best move is not to take it, funnily enough. f6 check just, I think, mates by 4s. King h7. Bishop takes e4, wins the queen. So you can't do that. So you have to play king h8. And you just take on e7. Yeah. Okay. I was expecting some sort of like queen h5 here, but does queen h5 work? Was that good? Knight g8. Okay, I missed that. My bad. Okay. F4. Yeah, f4 is something that I liked bishop f4, and the reason why I like bishop f4 is because I can also play moves like knight e5 and just kind of go after the queen a little bit and make them just find a lot of moves like defensively, right? When you're up material, it's kind of fun to play with your opponent like that. So here I was considering knight takes f7, and that is actually the move. I played a3 first. Yeah, bishop does feel a little natural, right? Just because, well, like f4 is always something you play in the King's Indian, so I feel like that's something that definitely should have been played because, well, as King's Indian players, we cry and die for f4. I just didn't see a purpose when we're up material, right? Because although it might have been a bigger edge, it also opens up our king a little bit more. And again, it's not really a big issue because they don't have a dark square bishop, so the consequences of this diagonal opening aren't as big. But just something to keep in mind is that f4 is still something that we're happy to play. We're up too much material for it to matter. So knight takes f7 is best. I played a3 first, and then I think I took on f7 here, which I thought was fine. And the idea here was if they went queen f6, I was actually planning to take on h6. And it looks like this is totally winning. Knight takes h6 is totally fine. It's not the best move, but as we can see, it's doing the job pretty well. Like, we give back the piece, but look at their king, right? That's the idea, is we trade in a slight, we give back a small amount of material for a bigger advantage in a different way. So queen c5, d4, queen c4. Yeah, I was thinking rook c1. I ended up just going knight e5 just to save my piece. Queen c3, e takes d5 finally. Takes, and was bishop takes h6 is the second best move. Knight g2 is best, so I'm happy about that. Knight g2 is best, and then bishop takes h6 is top move. It's like, okay, great. So we found the right idea, which is awesome. So I feel pretty happy about this game because of that. I wonder if there was another way to mate faster. I think rook e1 apparently, because knight f7 and then rook e8 issues are coming in. But I was happy with just this knight f7, and then the problem is they can't defend properly. So as mentioned before, queen takes d4 would run into rook to d1 where the knight hangs. There's no way to defend it. And if they try offering a queen trade, we can either go into it. Queen f6 might be the trickiest one, but all we have to do is just either take with the queen or give a check and then take with the rook. So then knight c6, rook c1 wins this piece, and of course this is all over now. And one funny variation that I wanted to show was this, queen d2, where we can actually just play a move like knight e3, and they can't actually take it, because if they take it, then it's just a mate in one. So it's just a way to block all the pieces, so they have to play a move like knight f6, but that just prolongs the inevitable with rook takes f6. And that's the game. Yeah, I think this was a really good one. And this is a model game of how you can play against e5, against anything, really, with the King's Indian attack with these same concepts. So that's going to cover it.